What's going on? We're jumping in on a PPR Mock Draft 12 team right here on Sleeper as we'll pull up the draft settings so you can get a look at what we're working with for this particular mock draft. PPR, 12 teams. Check out the roster settings: 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, a tight end, a flex, 1 quarterback, no super flex for this draft, and we'll go with 5 bench spots, not worrying about drafting kickers or defenses or anything like that for a mock draft. And I'm just going to pick, I usually like to kind of choose somewhere random in the middle. We'll go be team number 7, and we'll get things started, see how the draft unfolds. I'm curious to see how Sleeper does this early in the process. It's mid-June, late June, June 21st, 2023, as we record this mock draft. So we'll fire it up. Let things get going here on Sleeper. Good little sound effects. And hopefully it gets going here. May need to edit some things here. Yeah, CPU auto draft. All right, there we go. I was thinking anytime would be nice, computer. Okay, so let's see what the computer comes up with here. Justin Jefferson, the 1-1 overall. Makes sense to me. I'm honestly kind of surprised to see Jamar Chase down at 4 behind Cooper Kupp. I love Cooper Kupp, but to me, Jefferson and Chase are the top 2 guys, especially for this format, right? And a lot of times you might think historically running backs go early, and we do see Austin Eckler there, which, again, I feel like Sleeper has a lot of honing in to do. And so when we do more of these, it'll be nice to get some real people in here to mock draft with. But for now, we'll work with what we've got. But Eckler, I think he'll have a good season with Los Angeles now that it seems confirmed that he's going to actually be there. Nice to see. And I'm talking through this. I need to probably edit the settings a little bit here, give myself some time to make my own draft pick. McCaffrey, I think, is probably the top running back off the board for me. But another guy that's going to merit consideration is Bijan Robinson. We see him here at number 8. And I say wide receivers going early in this setting makes sense because we do have 3 wide receivers in our starting lineup. I can pull up the roster here. You'll be able to see it on the bottom right. And so 3 wide receivers plus a flex, plus the PPR factor does make wide receiver a little bit more valuable of a position. I'm going to go ahead and give myself a little more time for making these picks as I kind of talk things through. That way I won't have to pause it all the time. So we'll resume it, though, for now. Give myself a little more time to talk this through. Typically, I like to go wide receiver early. You see Travis Kelce goes off the board at number 6. I think that's probably going to be pretty common this year for redraft, given the positional advantage that he provided at tight end last season. So not too surprised to see that. I'm looking at Bijan Robinson, man. I'm high on what he could do this year as a rookie. They invested a lot in him in Atlanta. Arthur Smith wants to run the ball, and then run the ball some more. I think Tyreek Hill probably has a great season too. So I'm kind of looking over the wide receivers. Middle of the round, I'm usually going wide receiver, but because of 3 wideouts off the board in the first 4 picks, I'm not afraid to start running back here. And this could be maybe kind of a hero RB build, which is a little bit scary for having your hero RB be a rookie. But I am going to go Bijan Robinson here because I'm curious to see kind of how it'll pan out in so doing. As we see the auto pick fill in a lot of wide receivers there. 6 wide receivers off the board out of the 10 picks that went between my first and second round pick. Hill, Adams, Lamb, all probable late first round names. Jonathan Taylor could be a value there at 111. Saquon Barkley. Derrick Henry is going to be a tough guy to figure this season. If he falls off the cliff, people may be wishing they didn't grab him early in the second round as he goes 2.1 here. But then again, he's been a bona fide top 5 name for most of the years, and he's a freak of nature, and so he could end up being a value. That's going to be a volatile pick, Derrick Henry. And we're looking at Diggs, A.J. Brown, and Jalen Waddle off the board. I would have loved to have snagged one of those wide receivers. I didn't get the chance to do so. And so now I'm staring down Amon-Ra St. Brown. I'm definitely thinking wide receiver here. As much as Nick Chubb, I think, has a good redraft season. Tony Pollard, I'm a big fan of, and there's a lot of upside for Breece Hall, but the injury makes you a little bit wary of him. I got to go wide receiver now because, again, the format here, 3 wide receiver draft. We've already got Bijan Robinson, so we're probably not looking running back for a little while here. Definitely am tempted by Mark Andrews. I feel like Travis Kelce and Mark Andrews are going to have a good 1 round, if not a round and a half gap between the two of them. And I think with the pass-oriented offense coming into Baltimore, with Todd Monken, the new OC there from the University of Georgia, I think Andrews ends up being a lot closer to Kelce than the draft price is going to indicate. But because I went RB first, I'm really typically I want to make sure I'm deep at wide receiver with this setting, with the 3 wideouts in my lineup. And so I'm looking at Amon-Ra St. Brown, I'm looking at Garrett Wilson, and I don't think I could really go wrong with either. I'm very high on the leap that Garrett Wilson may have. But because of the Jameson Williams 6-game suspension, I'm going to for now lean Amon-Ra's direction. I think it's going to be a very pass-happy offense again in Detroit. Garrett Wilson probably going to fly off the board here shortly after my pick. Quarterbacks are going heavily. We have still not seen Garrett Wilson. There he goes at 3.2. T. Higgins off the board. I'm looking at wide receiver again, maybe wishing I would have had a crack at Devontae Smith. But we've still got good options there on the board to double up on wide receiver here after the Amon-Ra St. Brown pick. Checking out some of the other picks that went. Interesting quarterback alignment in this draft. Allen, Mahomes, Hurts. I think I'd lean Mahomes over Allen. But then again, Josh Allen with the upside that he brings rushing the football. Same with Jalen Hurts. You can't really go wrong with any of those guys. I think Mark Andrews is a great value at 2.11. It does my heart good to see Tony Pollard up to the second round. He was my number 1 target in all my redrafts that I did last season. I wanted him on every team that I could get him in the 6th and 7th round. And, his value has certainly risen, and rightfully so. I don't mind any of the picks. I think this is about pretty chalky for the 3rd round. You're getting some good value here. I'm checking out the running backs real quickly. I could see Kenneth Walker or ETN being really nice picks. I could see Jahmyr Gibbs being a nice pick here. And had I not gone Bijan Robinson in the 1st round and then with a Lion in the 2nd, Gibbs would be much more of a temptation. I really like him for dynasty drafts. But for now, we're going to look elsewhere. I'm not going quarterback. I tend to wait on quarterback unless somebody falls into my lap. I like Joe Burrow, but I need rushing upside if I'm taking a quarterback this early. I really do like Chris Olave. I think he's a pretty good pick probably at this spot. I can't see the bye weeks here for my wide receivers, which is not the end of the world. Yeah, I'm not even figuring out how to do that. I think I'd have to widen the screen a little bit. Nevertheless, not too worried about bye weeks anyway. But Chris Olave is staring me down. I think Deebo Samuel could be a value, but you got some health concerns there. I like going with the young upside draft. I'm gonna take Chris Olave here. I think he showed a lot, and maybe with a little more consistency at quarterback this year in New Orleans with Derek Carr coming in, I think you could have a nice year 2 breakout for a guy that was really strong in year 1 in Chris Olave out of Ohio State. So we'll look at who came off the board next. Burrow and Lamar Jackson both going in the 3rd round. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with 5 quarterbacks being off the board after just 3 rounds. I think Kenneth Walker is a great value. I like what this team did here with Walker and Deebo Samuel. I think they're a little too RB heavy. I'll be curious to see if the wide receiver value falls to them like they're probably hoping. And again, these are all computers, so they don't really have feelings about these things. But where I am right now, we'll look at our roster a little bit real quick because we're on the clock. I like the start. Amon-Ra St. Brown, Chris Olave, I think are really 2 high upside players. Amon-Ra has a really good floor as well. Bijan, I'm aiming for the home run with him. I oftentimes don't mind going back to the wide receiver well. If I won, I could look tight end. I think TJ Hawkinson's going to be really interesting, and I may take him just to kind of mix it up a little bit. There's value at wide receiver late, but I'm not one of those drafters that says, oh, you can pick up wide receivers anywhere. I feel like it's much easier to identify the home run calls at wide receiver in these early rounds, whereas I am going to stock up on probably depth at running back as I get later and later and just hope that I can plug in one of my late-round RBs on a weekly basis alongside Bijan Robinson while putting 3 wide receivers and then a wide receiver in my flex as my lineup. Calvin Ridley is interesting, a little too risky for me, though. Same with DeAndre Hopkins, not yet knowing where he'll play. And then I look and say, well, these next guys at wide receiver aren't really stacking up. I'd love to have Christian Watson, but I might play the ADP game a little bit because he's right below that line. I could gamble and lose, but I don't think Godwin's a terrible choice as we get a little later. But, man, it's risky. I'm going to play the gamble and lose, and I'm going to take TJ Hawkinson because I think he's going to get a lot of play in that Minnesota offense. As we watch the board unfold, and there it is. We were hoping not to see Christian Watson. We gambled and lost a little bit. I like the upside of Christian Watson big time, and I think we can look back on that pick and say it was a bad one because Dallas Goedert falling to the next round. We could have taken Watson and then gone Goddard, and I think that would have probably been the better alignment. I'm not taking Drake London because I don't believe that clearly with the way I prioritize Bijan Robinson, I'm not high on Drake London's prospects, not because I don't trust the player or like the player, but it's more about the offense and what I expect it to be. So we're not loving the way this is breaking down, to be totally honest. I would rather have Christian Watson in this spot, and then I could have done something else at tight end. But it's good sometimes to challenge yourself in a mock draft, do things that make you uncomfortable, and then see how you can respond to it and rebound from it. Because, again, mock drafts are to get you ready for the real thing. And so we don't have any problem with it. We're looking down the board at wide receiver. Tyler Lockett's a guy that I would like to have in my flex a lot of times, but I don't know about at wide receiver 3. I'm a big Tyler Lockett fan. I think he still will produce this year in that offense with Geno Smith. If anything, I think Smith and Jigba being on that roster helps just kind of spread the love around and make life difficult on the defense. I think I'm going to target Tyler Lockett in the 6th round here in this draft. There are some good running backs falling. I think Javonte Williams is a value here. I don't know about the whole dead zone thing when it comes to RBs this year. I think you could find that there's value in those rounds 3 through 6 at running back. I don't hate Miles Sanders here. Alexander Madison, I think, would be a nice pick if I didn't already have Hawkinson. I don't want to double up too much on the same team. DeAndre Swift could be a home run. I could really be delving in. There's just so many running backs that I don't mind late. I wish there was a wide receiver that I like more here. It does make it tricky. I'm going to have to make a decision here. We're going to go with Michael Pittman. I don't love it, and I don't love the way the draft is breaking down just because I had my targets at wide receiver, and I overthought it a little bit with Hawkinson. But again, we can live with that. I think Swift is a great value there. That Philly offense is going to be a productive place for a running back to live. I don't love the Pittman play. But if Anthony Richardson is the starter there and can end up unloading on some downfield passes, maybe that helps out Michael Pittman. And again, he's our wide receiver 3. The way we construct this, we're looking at that running back position. Akers, Javonte Williams, even Kamara, I think is worth the risk as an RB2. And so I don't mind it at all. But I don't know that my choice in Tyler Lockett's gonna fall to me. I'm pretty sure he won't. But then again, I like George Pickens. Smith and Jigba could be interesting in your flex. I don't mind the way we're building this out. The specific names, I got a little too cutesy with Hawkinson and Pittman, which is okay. This is really the first mock draft I've done of the year, and so we're getting an idea for what we like, what we prefer. And I think the ADPs are going to change so much, too, between now and draft time when you get into the late summer, into August, that you're just learning about kind of the board a little bit at this point. Elsewhere at wide receiver, Mike Williams is attractive for an upside play, I think, but he's very similar to Pittman, where I feel like could be a little boom bust. And so I don't know if I want too much of that in my lineup. I don't really view Tyler Lockett that way. I think you can trust what he's going to bring to the table. But, man, there's some value at running back. Down the board, I like Montgomery, but I do have a Lion on my team already. I like James Cook. I like A.J. Dillon. Beyond that, it gets a little bit bleak. You're going to want that RB2, I think, before that point. Quarterback is a consideration coming down on the end of our clock here. I'm looking late. Like Anthony Richardson could be an interesting stack because, again, this is a 1 QB, 12-team league. If it doesn't pan out with Richardson, there are other guys you could go to. Since I'm down on the clock, I identified Lockett earlier that I wanted him on my team. So I'm going to go ahead and draft him here as we take a look at the board unfolding. And George Pickens would not have made it to us as our flex. So we could have gone RB there. Javonte Williams would have been a consideration. Kamara, we talked about liking. I don't think Pickens would have made it to us in this spot in the 7th round. So we're okay with the way that unfolded. And generally, people may not be as high on Tyler Lockett as I am. But we'd love to check out his player card. I mean, he has just produced year over year. Hoping to find his box scores here. I mean, we're looking at PPR, and so you can say 237 points last year, 241, 264, 234. I'm cool with that in my flex, man. And I don't think Tyler Lockett hits a wall, even at age 30. I think Geno Smith is stable there at the quarterback position in Seattle. I think they're going to have enough love to go around. I trust Tyler Lockett. He's just got a knack for the game. So I'm high on him in that spot. I like Jordan Addison, but I do already have the tight end in Minnesota. I've got my 4 wide receivers. I've got my 3 guys that are going to start. I've got my flex. I do think it's about time to maybe address the RB2, and I don't mind any of these names here, honestly. These first 4, Pacheco, Montgomery, James Cook, A.J. Dillon, I don't mind any of them. Dillon's going to be a little more volatile, I think, because Aaron Jones is still there in Green Bay. Pacheco, man, is interesting for the upside. Montgomery, I think, is going to be a nice play, but I view it as he's a pass catcher. He can catch the football, but I think Gibbs is going to be more of the third down role, and I'm looking for PPR possibilities here. I'm looking between James Cook and Pacheco here. 2 guys on elite offenses. Not a ton of draft capital necessarily, but both figure to have pretty nice roles. I'm going to lean James Cook and pick him here because Pacheco's still got others to deal with in that backfield. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, even McKinnon is back on a 1-year deal with the Chiefs. So we'll go Pacheco. We'll go James Cook. Pacheco goes 1 pick after us, and we're fine with that. A couple of quarterbacks come off the board. We don't have to worry about tight ends, so this doesn't bother us. We identified Addison as a guy we like, but that's okay. Quarterback, starting to get interesting here. If we want to guarantee Richardson, which we're not desperate to do, but we would like the stack with Pittman. High risk, high reward there. And like I said, we should feel good about our late round ability to identify wide receivers in case Pittman doesn't pan out. And we're not that worried about quarterback. We're watching the board, though. Quarterback. So only Team 6 needs a quarterback. They could definitely go Richardson, but we don't mind stacking Kirk Cousins either with TJ Hawkinson. You don't need the stack in redraft, but I find that it's nice if you've got a guy that you know is going to be heavily targeted. It's a nice way to kind of boost your lineup a little bit. I enjoy going for them when they fall to me. I don't have to force it, though. We've got 2 running backs. We could really go anywhere positionally that we want right now. I don't love the upcoming names on the board at wide receiver, but Kadarius Toney is interesting because we don't know who's going to be the primary target other than Kelsey in that KC offense, and Patrick Mahomes is going to get his. We do expect that to be the case. Gabe Davis down the board. Jamison Williams, I think, after the suspension could be interesting. Lazard is interesting for the value there. Because I want to be a little more robust at wide receiver, I do think I go wide receiver here. But again, if this draft had fallen just a little bit differently, I might have been able to land more of my targets. Looking in the mid-rounds here, Pickens is a general target if it fits my draft. Addison, same thing. I don't mind Ayuk. But we've had a few things go off the rails a little bit on us. But we're in a decent spot. We're going to take Kadarius Toney here. Team 6 does take a quarterback. It's Deshaun Watson. We like that. As long as nobody takes their backup here, we might identify Anthony Richardson as a target. Oh, and he goes a couple of picks before us as Team 5 does take a backup. And like we said, it's not the end of the world. That's probably not something you see happen. If somebody takes Josh Allen in the 2nd, you don't expect him to take another quarterback in the 9th. But Richardson is that kind of high-risk, high-reward guy that you don't mind stashing on your bench. And Team 5 might say, look, I've got 3 wide receivers here. I mean, Godwin, Pickens, Cooks could easily be a nice core there. A team with McCaffrey, Ramondre, and Javonte. I mean, that's a really nice roster, and they handled tight end early as well. They're not as deep as at wide receiver as I personally like to go into a season being, but I understand that roster. And Anthony Richardson, if he does pan out as a high-value guy that runs the football, I don't generally draft to say, oh, I could trade this player later on. But I understand the thought process there. And again, we're trying to identify thought processes of computers, so that's a little bit of a fool's errand. But it's kind of fun to think through, what is my opponent looking to do? What should they be looking to do? And does it match up with what they ultimately make happen? Kind of fun there. So now anything could really happen. In a real draft, I would not be so inclined to have to grab a quarterback yet. And honestly, Jared Goff with Amon-Ra is a stack that I'd be kind of intrigued by. You'd want to have maybe another guy off your bench and stream quarterback a little bit because we haven't seen Jared Goff often play very well on the road. But I'm going to wait on quarterback just because I just am not that worried about it. I think there's value late, and it's a 1 QB league. It's a 1 QB, and I think I set it up for 4 point per passing touchdown, so it's really not that big of a deal. Cortland Sutton, Rashad Bateman could be interesting on a bounce back, but that's a crowded wide receiver core in Baltimore. I don't even hate Adam Thielen. We've only got 2 running backs, though, so let's kind of quickly identify here. Devin A-Chain, upside. Zach Charbonnet, upside. We're going to just grab an A-Chain share just because there's a home run hitting possibility there, and we don't need him in our lineup. As we see here, A-Chain is on our bench. We got 3 bench spots left to fill. Kirk Cousins goes 1 pick before us. So again, we're staying really patient when it comes to quarterback, but we're getting burned by that a little bit. It just doesn't bother me, though. I mean, you can look at Aaron Rodgers, could easily be a nice pick. If we had gone up here, if we had gone Garrett Wilson instead of Amon-Ra, then maybe we're really saying, well, just lock in that stack with A-Rod. Daniel Jones will give you some rushing upside. Geno Smith, we could stack with Tyler Lockett. But I think week to week, he's going to be a little bit volatile. Jared Goff should still be there next round. Why is everybody drafting a backup? I don't know how much Kyler Murray's going to play this year, but I mean, you can go down the board. I like the San Francisco guys, Purdy or Lance, whoever it is. You could. I think there's something to be said for all the way at the bottom. Just don't draft a quarterback and then draft Purdy and Lance, and then week 1 you figure it out. And especially in leagues where you do have to draft a defense and maybe a kicker, or you eventually have to roster one of those positions or both of them. Don't draft them, especially if you're drafting in July or August and there's a lot of time before the beginning of the season. I think you can just draft those 2 quarterbacks, let training camp sort itself out. Whichever guy doesn't end up being the starter, you can drop him for your kicker or your defense like the night before week 1. I don't think there's any problem with that. I didn't say a lot about A-Chain, but I just think with the speed and the way that Mike McDaniel, we know, wants to run the football and run his offense, I think it's a nice fit there for A-Chain. So that's why we take that guy in that spot, and he's our 3rd running back. So we feel a little bit about running back. We'd like to leave the draft with 1 more running back. I don't think it has to be quite yet. Dalton Kincaid is interesting. We're going to pause the draft briefly just because we've kind of talked through a lot of non-pick related items here as we've been on the clock. And so I'm going to take a quick run through. We've got 4 picks left. We're taking a quarterback with 1 of them. We don't think it's got to be yet. We do want a 4th running back, but it doesn't have to be yet. I'm not too keen on needing like a Tyler Algier in such a short bench to be my handcuff to Bijan Robinson. I think Tyler Algier actually is fantasy relevant because of how much they're going to run the ball in Atlanta, but I don't need to do that here. So I'm not too concerned about that. Looking elsewhere here at the running backs available, Kendre Miller is honestly kind of interesting. How do I cue him? We'll queue up Kendre Miller just in case he falls a couple rounds and we still are looking for that guy. Zeke Elliott, honestly, especially for a draft this early, I think there could be value in drafting someone like him. I think he's not that good, but if he lands in a great situation, especially if, like, God forbid, Buffalo should add him, and then we go, well, James Cook is toast now. We can't start him. You want to be thinking about stuff like that. Where else can we go here? I like Dalton Kincaid, but I've invested at tight end, and so I don't necessarily need to go that route. Elijah Mitchell is kind of interesting too. Like, this is the part of the draft where I think by the end of the season, guys like Kendre Miller, guys like Elijah Mitchell could certainly end up being very fantasy relevant. You just don't know who it's going to be this early on. I'm tempted to go Adam Thielen and just be team old guys at wide receiver, but we did draft Kadarius Toney. I feel decent about wide receiver. I don't love this draft, honestly, but I think it's a good exercise to be able to kind of feel out who you have and who you wish you had if you had it to do over again, because eventually will come the day where you don't have it to do over again, right? Your real draft will arrive, and you'll have to figure out under the gun who you want. I like having Bijan. I like these first 2 receivers. I think if I had a comparable name instead of Pittman, I'm very intrigued by that. I like having Lockett as my flex in a 3 wideout system. You know, he's my wide receiver 4. I like that. Toney is upside. A-Chain is upside. I think that's exactly what you're looking for from your bench in a league where it's not too deep. I don't consider 12-teamers very deep. I play a lot of 14-team leagues, and so I'm kind of comfortable with what the rosters look like in a 12-teamer. But if there's anybody on my bench, the only reason he's sitting there is because he's got tremendous upside. I'll trust myself. If somebody gets hurt of my main guys, if James Cook doesn't, end up getting the touches that I hope to see from him, I can plug and play on somebody. I can find somebody off waivers for a week. But I want upside on my bench. I don't want to have guys who are on my bench where I have to go, well, every single week I'm wondering, is he worth starting? Is he not? By week 4, week 5, Kadarius Toney, Devin Achane, you'll look at some of these guys and you'll know by then if the role ends up matching what you kind of had in terms of hope for them at the beginning of the season. So with that in mind, what would be an upside play to add to this bench? I think Lazard would be a good fit. And I didn't draft his teammate Garrett Wilson, so that's interesting. Obviously, he's got a rapport with Aaron Rodgers coming over from Green Bay. And then you could also have the really low cost stack if A-Rod drops another round. I'm not ready to go wide. I'm not ready to go running back. I don't feel compelled to need a Kincaid here. If he drops another round, I might consider him. But I do think I'm looking at Allen Lazard here. And again, this is not a guy that I find that I'm targeting in a lot of drafts, but because of the way it's gone so far, I feel like that's an upside play. This will probably be my last wide receiver too, so I can look down board and make sure there's nobody that I'm feeling like I'm missing out on. And I like some of these guys in deeper leagues. 14-team leagues, I love filling out my bench because I'll target some of these guys down low. Romeo Dobbs, Jalen Hyatt could be interesting. Wandale could be interesting. Wandale Robinson. So those are all like somewhat intriguing if you get a little deeper into it. But for now, I'm just going to grab Allen Lazard and move on. Rodgers is off the board. Kincaid's off the board. These are guys that make sense to see him go. Geno's off the board. We don't really mind it. We'll just take whichever quarterback falls to us. And wrapping things up here, you've still got Algier, but I don't feel compelled. I'm probably leaning Kendre Miller because, again, I think along with A-Chain, there's an upside for what if Kamara gets suspended or what if Kamara doesn't play? What if he's not healthy? What if, Jamal Williams kind of loses some of his steam? The risk of it is minimal because if Kendre Miller doesn't pan out, I can just drop him. But if he does pan out, I end up with a really nice piece. So I think that's the pick for me here, Kendre Miller. I like to go upside on the bench. This is going to be an example of that. Jared Goff going off the board. I probably should have taken a peek at quarterback again because we might have gone with Goff there. But, I mean, even Russell Wilson, Bryce Young, it just doesn't bother me. It doesn't bother me that much. In fact, I may do what I suggested and go Purdy Lance just to demonstrate that I think there's validity to that. Let's make sure that we don't have any glaring holes in our roster. Otherwise, Bijan Robinson, James Cook, A-Chain, and Kendre Miller at running back. Again, that's a young team, obviously. Cook was a rookie last year. Everybody else is a rookie this year. And so early on, you may be a little bit lean at running back as these guys kind of find their way. But I don't mind it because I think I'm comfortable starting both of these guys, James Cook and Bijan Robinson, week 1. So I'm good with that, the way that breaks down. I like Amon-Ra. I like Olave. I think those are both upside, and in Amon-Ra's case, certainly a very quality floor as well. Michael Pittman, I am not enthused by, but you remember as we were in that portion of the draft, I talked about, DJ Moore I would like over Pittman. It just so happens that, and this is something to teach myself to learn, okay, here's how you feel about the 5th round players. If you're in the mid to late 5th and you don't get a crack at Christian Watson or even Calvin Ridley, Godwin, Moore, those are all guys I'd rather have over Pittman. And so you got to know, hey, sometimes if, depending on my draft position, I selected 7 just to kind of challenge myself with a mid-round spot, you may not get the layout that you're looking for. And so that's something I learned. But Pittman, there's a chance that he ends up being just fine. And he's my wide receiver 3, so I'm not too worried about that. Hawkinson, again, is not a guy that I think I'll be targeting a ton going into drafts, but to challenge myself by going early, mid-round tight end, normally I'm going to be waiting on tight end, and I'm going to be adding Dalton Kincaid down here, or Chig Okonkwo down here, and I'm pretty comfortable with the way that sorts itself out because most people end up on waivers for tight end anyway. But as it stands, man, well, let's make sure I can pause this draft real quick. As it stands, I think I'm just going to do what I said feels like a fine thing to do. We'll resume it, and we'll take Trey Lance, and then we'll take Brock Purdy, assuming he's still there. And if not, I probably should have gone Purdy over Lance. I like Lance, huge Trey Lance fan. If he doesn't play, then that's obviously going to be a knock on his ability to contribute to your fantasy team. But I don't see Sam Darnold starting in this elite San Francisco offense. I don't buy it. Lance or Purdy, I'm so comfortable with either of those guys. And I'm hoping it's Lance because I've invested in him in Dynasty. But that's kind of what it breaks down as for me. There's the roster. Trey Lance, Bijan Robinson, James Cook, Amon-Ra, Olave, Pittman, Hawkinson, Lockett, Tony A-Chain, Lazard, Kendre Miller, and Brock Purdy. And again, I'll drop whichever quarterback doesn't appear to be the starter heading into week 1, and we'll be comfortable with whatever that needs to look like, and we can then pick up somebody with upside off the bench. So let me know what you think of this mock draft, of this style of video. We'll be happy to do some different videos as the season approaches for the NFL. But give me some feedback on this. Let me know what you didn't like about my draft, what surprised you as you looked at the draft board overall. And we'll talk to you next time. Peace.